So as we settle in, we'll take a couple minutes and we'll do the Three Refuges, and we chant these traditional, Buddhist refuges a little bit more slowly than is traditional, just so we can hear each other singing together. Of course, that's a different world when we're doing it online. You're just hearing my voice and your voice, hopefully, and just do your best. And remember this Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha that we're taking refuge in, these three refuges. It's just Buddhist code for what we do in our practice. These awakening qualities, capacity to be awake and being intimate with the way it is. Dhamma, Buddha, knowing Dhamma. When we have some, when we're established in that Buddha, knowing Dhamma, have some continuity, then more and more in little and big ways, Sangha, this enlightened or awakened activity, this compassionate and wise activity, engagement, begins to manifest naturally. It's the natural arising out of Buddha knowing Dhamma, that capacity to be intimate with what's moving in our hearts, what's moving around us and in us. And so it's just a nice thing to do with a group of folks that we're dedicating ourselves to studying these teachings and bringing them into life in our lives, to do this sort of beautiful song together where we are singing about what we find really valuable in our lives. Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha. So let's begin the chant. Buddham saranam gacchami, Dhammam saranam gacchami, Sangham saranam gacchami, Dutiyampi Buddham saranam gacchami, Dutiyampi Dhammam saranam gacchami, Dutiyampi Sangham saranam gacchami, Tatiyampi Buddham saranam gacchami, Tatiyampi Dhammam saranam gacchami, Tatiyampi Sangham saranam gacchami. So settle into a comfortable posture, for the meditation time. Feeling at home, coming home to the experience of the sitting body, not afraid to feel whatever's here to feel now. And noticing any tendencies in your heart to want to begin the meditation And notice that the quality of awareness is already here and now, even before you, in a sense, officially do anything to meditate. Already, isn't it true that mindful awareness is present? So notice the awareness, the mind recognizing that this is being known, or recognizing what's being known. And this recognizing the present moment, it isn't conceptual, it doesn't depend on the mind naming the experience or describing what's happening to itself. Instead, it's just a very simple reflective knowing that this experience is being known now. That's all. This experience of the mind or body is being known now. And in this sense, awareness doesn't really care what the object is that's being known. Around meditation. And instead, we're just simply noticing the awareness that is here and now. So I made some changes to the internet here, and hopefully that will take care of any connectivity problems. And in any case, we're just contemplating the very nature of awareness, this capacity to recognize that this is being known, that experience, different objects of experience are being known. And related to this contemplation is just to notice that being present, being mindfully aware, has a taste of freedom to it. There's something liberating, something releasing, and recognizing that this is being known. It's like the burden of complexity and agendas fall away. So we're just sitting here, we're contemplating, noticing that this moment is being known, and noticing at some point moments of distraction, the mind getting lost in thought. And when the mind is under the influence of liking or not liking some subtle or not so subtle drama, then notice the tension that arises, the squeeze of the heart that comes with distraction and attachment without judgment. And then notice in those moments when the mind is more simple, this simplicity of if this is being known, it's like this now. Notice the lightness, the absence of that squeeze on the heart, that tension in the mind. Probably more than anything, this subtle inner pleasure of mindfulness, continuity of present moment awareness. More than anything, this inner pleasure can help guide and develop our practice. Knowing that being present is pleasant, and being distracted, being caught up with the likes and dislikes is stressful. And this reality gets confirmed over and over again. So if we haven't learned that lesson, we can learn it now. The simple joy, taste of freedom that comes with the continuity of present moment awareness, and the tightness and stress that comes when the mind is identified and caught up in different ways with its thoughts, its agendas, including any agenda around the practice. That too causes stress. And this accessing this inner barometer that mindfulness and the continuity of mindfulness feels good really helps us build momentum in our awakening practice. So when you need to start over, just start over with the question, well, what is mindful awareness now? Is there any mindful awareness? What is that experience? Can I notice more clearly in the moment this activity of mindful awareness? So I can notice that it's associated with this flavor of freedom, spaciousness, and that distraction is associated with tension. So that I learn how to build momentum. So now let's continue in silence for the last 10 or 15 minutes. Keep it really simple. Just recognizing mindful awareness or its absence, and sense the freedom, the space that's there with the mindful awareness and the tension that's there without it. And don't be surprised if this interest in building momentum is frustrating, because the habit-based mind will presume that we need an agenda in order to make something happen. But instead, moment by moment, as best you can, get interested in the presence, the natural presence of awareness that's here and now already, uncontrived, already here. And in recognizing this mindful awareness, Notice that it has a subtle taste of freedom. It feels right. It feels good. And when the mind gets seduced and caught up in some drama, little or big, always associated with some tightness, some stress, even if it's subtle. Even if there's excitement, there will be some tightness with the excitement. And just that is enough to build momentum, being curious over and over again about the presence of mindful awareness and noticing that it feels good, feels right, in the direction of release. And for the last minute, realizing that we always start over again, here and now. We can actually never be far away. Even when we're lost in thought, it seems like we're a million miles away. But it's important to understand that we're not. That even that being lost in thought, fantasizing, even that is here and now. It's just not being recognized as something being known, here and now. So take a little time, adjust the body. So good evening, everyone. Really nice to be together. Always appreciate having the opportunity to reflect on these beautiful and comprehensive and practical maps that have been handed down through the centuries. And in particular, this is week 5 of our 7-week course on the Buddhist teachings on the Noble Eightfold Path. And we're moving into the last third that we haven't talked about, which is the Buddhist teachings on samadhi. And probably it's often translated as concentration, but probably a better translation is the unification of the heart, the coming together of the heart and mind, in the sense that all of the activities of the heart, of the mind, are serving the same purpose, which is to connect, clearly connect, open to be with the conditions of the moment, see clearly the conditions of the moment. And so when there's that stability, when there's that unification of the heart with this, around this purpose of connecting, seeing clearly the way it is, then we say the mind has samadhi. There is samadhi. And the Buddha breaks this down in terms of having wise, bringing wise effort into the moment, wise mindfulness, and wise concentration into the moment, and these three working together. And as you might guess, the Buddha has a simile of this, where there are 3 folks, and they see some beautiful flowers up in the tree, and they want to pick those flowers, or fruit, or whatever you want to imagine is up in that tree. And the 3 folks, 3 people work together. Somebody gets down on their hands and knees and creates a nice solid base for the tallest of the 3 to stand on. And then that tall person standing on the back of the first person, not so stable. So the third person comes close. The tall person puts their hand on the shoulder and is able to reach and get whatever they're looking for in that tree. And so that coming together, the 3 people working together, that's the unification of samadhi. And, you know, the initial base is this capacity we have to apply, to commit the mind to the purpose of seeing clearly, to really connect, and to make that's wise effort. And then the concentration, you know, the real connection really depends on that third person coming in, mindfulness, stabilizing. And the way to think about mindfulness is this capacity to not be confused by the conceptual overlays, the habits the mind has of, perceiving and identifying experience, but then getting confused, getting caught up in the ideas, and forgetting, disconnecting from the actual experience. So mindfulness helps concentration keep its attention on the thing itself, which allows concentration to actually connect. And it's that intimate connection, that really seeing clearly, feeling deeply, opening, that allows for insight, the deepening of wisdom. And so this is the third part of the path. And there are different ways to talk about the awakening process, but the way we've been doing it in the course is the spiritual life, the awakening process begins as our heart realizes that our life and how we're showing up in the moment really matters. And you can think of this as that initial wisdom of karma, that how I'm showing up matters. And wishing that it didn't matter, that matters. Like there's a consequence to giving up or not wanting it to matter, or trying too hard because it matters, or trying hard in a way that's not helpful, getting tight about things. Prove to us that it's not going to help. So we know it matters. So initially, being a beginner, we start to pay attention, knowing that it matters, to, well, given that it matters, how should I relate? And this opens up this whole world of what is wholesome and unwholesome. And in Buddhism, we call that wise, understanding what the wise intentions are, understanding what the not so wise intentions are. Generosity and renunciation, contentment, that's a wise category of intention or motivation. Kindness, that's a wise, useful, functional category of motivation and intention. The capacity or the valuing of non-harming, non-aggression, non-violence, not wanting to contribute to suffering, my own or anybody's. That's a wise, wholesome motivation. And the opposites prove to be stressful, causing ourselves and others suffering. So then we bring this initially into the most obvious part of our lives, how I'm relating, how I'm earning a living, how I'm using my speech. And we're applying what we've learned about what's skillful and unskillful in the most concrete and obvious part of our lives. And to the degree that we do that, our life begins to settle down because we're living more harmoniously with everybody, even if our world, as our world is deeply imperfect and a lot of injustice and a lot of inequities, but still applying these basic discernment between what is skillful and wholesome, unskillful, unwholesome, contentedness, generosity, renunciation, kindness, and a deep valuing of non-harming, compassion, versus the opposites, and then bringing it into my relationship with my partner, the relationship with my kid, relationship at work, relationships at work, relationship with the wider community. Then we just start to feel more and more this basic self-esteem of living in harmony, feeling like we belong in community. We belong in our relationships. We know how, to some degree, to make relationships work because we know what helps and what doesn't help make relationships work. And that really opens the door to the third part of the practice, which is now we can start to do more effectively this inner work because our outer life is more and more harmonious. So we first have some basic wisdom, it matters. We refine that into understanding what are wholesome and unwholesome motivations. We apply those to our outward life of relationship and how we earn a living and how we interact with the wider world and how we might be complicit in oppressive systems and really starting to care about these complexities, own them, learn how to show up in more skillful ways, so we feel better about ourselves in community, in relationship. And then we can start to do this inner work because we're already somewhat more settled because of the harmony we have in the outer world. So we start to apply what we learned about it matters and what's wholesome and unwholesome in a more subtle way in terms of what's moving in our mind and heart. It's almost like we're studying the inner world of like our inner dialogue and the different qualities of the mind, different habits of the mind, reactive patterns, ways of perceiving in this more subtle realm of our inner landscape. But we apply the same things that we've learned about what's wholesome and unwholesome there. And that's what I'm going to talk about, because this is the realm of samadhi, of bringing wise effort, wise mindfulness, wise concentration in order to really learn how to stabilize the inner space, to harmonize the inner space, just like we wanted to harmonize and stabilize the outer space of relationship. And of course, as the Buddha says, this inner stabilization of samadhi inevitably, unavoidably leads onward to insight. In fact, there's no way to prevent the deepening of insight, the mind seeing more clearly, understanding more deeply, in particular, the roots of suffering and how to release the causes for suffering. There's no way to stop that deepening of insight when the samadhi, the momentum of samadhi begins to build. And the image I think I maybe mentioned in a previous week is of the Ganges River flowing inevitably to the ocean, can't be dammed and stopped in the long term, right? It's gonna flow downstream. And when there's this good samadhi, this continuity of mindful awareness, balanced with the awakening factors, that mind, there's nothing to prevent it from seeing things as they are. And sometimes I use this image of this samadhi, this unification of the heart, stabilizing of mindful awareness, continuity of mindful awareness, as a kind of universal solvent that will dissolve cause for any ignorant, superficial patterns of perceiving to dissolve, to be uprooted. Ignorance can't hold up to the stability of awareness. So just give, just a simple example. If like most of us do almost all of the time, if we're taking things personally, and then reacting because this emotion I'm feeling, I think is personal, or how I perceive you to be treating me feels personal. So I'm in that mode, that ordinary mode of interpreting whatever's happening internally, my inner space of my heart and mind, externally, what I see and hear out there. I'm interpreting it in a personal way. And then let's say the momentum of mindfulness, wisdom awareness begins to settle and stabilize and be continuous. Well, that habit of perceiving, interpreting things in a personal way doesn't actually hold together when there's that stability and continuity of wisdom and awareness. So what we're calling samadhi, this stable present moment awareness, sees the wholes and that way of constructing reality, that, this is my person, this is my emotion, or that person is this way and I'm this way. So that dualistic personal kind of thinking and perceiving depends on superficial and distracted, distorted awareness. And when the awareness is unified and stable and clear, then it's impossible to perceive in a, in a way that isn't in alignment with the way it is. And this was really the brilliant discovery of the Buddha, that the way for us to gain freedom from the deep habits of how we perceive, how we think, how we view, how we believe, is to not try to go directly to changing our beliefs and views and patterns of perceiving. Give up on that project, but instead put all of our effort into stabilizing present moment awareness. Create the tool, the instrument that will cause understanding or the view to be transformed. So ultimately, the path of awakening is about purifying one's view. But nobody directly purifies their view. Because you might think, well, the way to purify my view is to read a lot about what wise view is, what the truth is. I'll read it, and then I'll gather the arguments about why that point of view is true in order to defend myself from other views, and then I'll have wisdom. That's kind of the intellectual approach to getting smart, getting wise, being right. And of course, all that leads to is, the Buddha would call it the, tangle of views, which, just ends up people endlessly quarreling with each other about who's right. So the Buddha's brilliant discovery is the natural and impersonal way for the heart to be transformed is to train the heart to deeply value this powerful solvent of stability of awareness, what we call samadhi, which requires this wise application or persistence or steadfastness. Like we have to be really dedicated, committed to this project of stabilizing awareness. And then we have to stabilize this even further by knowing the difference between the habit of sliding off into what we think is happening, but learning to stay right with the experience in and of itself, the non-conceptual truth of what's being known in the moment, not my mental interpretation. Now, that mental interpretation is going to happen because part of what the mind does is immediately interprets or narrates to itself what it's directly experiencing. But to help stabilize present moment awareness, the mindfulness piece that we'll talk more about next week is the effort just kind of keeps us in the ball game of the present moment. But mindfulness then does this more subtle distilling between, oh, this is actually what's being known. Thoughts are just thoughts. Sights are just sights. Sounds are just sounds. Sensations are just sensations. It's really keeping the attention on the elemental truth of stuff being known, so that the mind, the attention rather, isn't confused, isn't seduced by the mind's habit of constructing a thought about what's happening. That habit of thinking is totally fine because it's just seen as that's just mental activity being known. And so when there's wise effort to abandon the grosser habits of distraction, and mindfulness then doing the more subtle discernment between conceptual and the way it is, and then concentration is that real intimacy. That's really the fruit where the mind is really connecting with Dhamma, with the way it is. So that's why we say, Buddha knowing Dhamma, like we chanted in the evening, at the beginning of the evening, that chant of the Three Refuges, Buddha knowing Dhamma, allows for this awakened, compassionate, wise activity of our lives, being engaged in those really beautiful ways. Ajahn Sushito, one of the elders, Western elders in this early Buddhism that we practice at Common Ground. It's been a monk, I think, probably 40 years or so, give or take, and teaches here in the States from time to time, originally born in England. He was just quoting in this wonderful essay on openness. He quotes this famous line from the suttas: "Wide open are the gates to the deathless. Let those who can listen bring forth their faith." And it's this faith, because we understand that it matters how we're showing up, that establishes some faith. In one different sutta, the Buddha talks about, just like the cycles of suffering has to be a natural process that continues on and on, these cycles of samsara, cycles of suffering, so too the awakening process has to be just a natural process. It has its own causes and conditions. In one sutta, he talks about, one discourse, that it's the experience of suffering that causes faith to arise. Because here I'm noticing that I'm a suffering human being, that things hurt, my heart feels tight, but there's something more there with that experience of suffering. There's some understanding that it doesn't have to be this way. I'm suffering, true, but I'm sensing that I don't need to be suffering right now. Now, this is not an uncommon experience. I bet today, most of us, at least once or twice, had this experience where we noticed we were caught up, we were tight, but there was something else there, like, it doesn't have to be this way. I don't need to be tight right now. I am tight, but I don't need to be tight. And that actually is the experience of faith. Like, there's a different way. This is not the only way. And so faith then leads to joyful effort, you could say, right? Like, I'm willing now to apply myself to learning from my life. Like, so if I'm pretty clear, this isn't the only way, there's a better way. Like, I'm suffering now, I'm entangled, I'm caught up, I'm reactive, and I have some sense this isn't the only way, then I'm naturally going to apply myself. Well, what might help? What might actually lead to release? And so he goes on in that discourse to talk about this, how the path unfolds. But it's very interesting for us to make the connection between this basic faith and that willingness to commit, to apply, to be steadfast, to persist in this project of stabilizing present moment awareness, really understanding the power of samadhi. And sometimes it's just better to use these new words like samadhi as that stabilized present moment awareness that really feels like, in this world where things are so fluid, it's like there can be moments when the heart really feels capable, moment by moment, with things changing, but the samadhi, the capacity to meet the moment, to see it as it is, feel it as it is, that can feel, it's surprising to use a word like this, but it can feel very solid, very firm, even though the world of experience is very fluid, things coming and going. But the power, the stability, the firmness, solidity of that clarity, that kind, non-judging, stable clarity can feel like trustworthy and powerful and like a refuge that leads onward in the direction the heart truly seeks, this direction of release. And this reminds me of, a very powerful teaching that's used quite a bit in early Buddhism called the Five Faculties, which really surrounds this section of the Noble Eightfold Path of wise effort, wise mindfulness, wise concentration, how they work together, right? This is the intimacy that we talk about, this phrase that I like to use a lot, that I forget originally who came up with this simple, short description of the Buddha's path of awakening as the marriage of intimacy and non-grasping. And I appreciate Judith's email to me asking about, like, how does that really work, this marriage of intimacy and non-grasping? Because they often seem to us to be opposites. Like, I can be, intimate, and I can be free of attachment, not attached, but I don't really get how to be intimate with the moment, really connecting with experience, and hands off, no attachment, not projecting an agenda on the moment. And it comes from understanding this section of the path that we're calling samadhi, this wise effort, wise mindfulness, wise concentration, working together for the purpose of connecting or seeing clearly, which then allows for the deepening of insight. And that there are some experiences when we do have that momentum, that unification of the heart, that stability of awareness that we're calling samadhi. Like, for example, one thing about that experience, and some of you, I'm sure, understand or know this experience, it feels really good. And I mentioned that in the guided meditation, which I encourage you to really take up as a way of practicing for a week or more, where you're really taking the time to recognize the presence of awareness. Uncontrived. You're not being mindful, you're noticing that there is mindful awareness available, and you're noticing that that mindful awareness is associated with feeling good, feeling light, feeling free. And when you lose it, lose the thread of that continuity of present moment awareness, then whatever the mind gets entangled with will have the flavor of being tight. So you're in the present moment. Is there awareness? Oh yeah, here's awareness. Okay, how do I know there's mindful awareness? Like, what is it in this moment that is compelling evidence of mindful awareness? And it's not about thinking, of course. I'm using words to talk about it, but we're just directly noticing the presence of this reflective present moment awareness, and that it's liberating, that it feels good, that it's pleasant. And then noticing both of those, there is awareness and it's liberating, it's pleasant, helps to build the momentum, right? And then noticing what gets in the way of that building of momentum. So this tells us a lot about wise effort. In a way, the most potent way to prevent and abandon, the hindrances, having a lot of doubt, being really dull, being really restless, full of worry, a lot of craving, a lot of wanting, a lot of aversion, is to really emphasize this mindful awareness, kind of taking refuge in the mindful awareness itself. So then it's not like you're trying to put out all these fires. It's more about keeping the attention, appropriate attention, useful attention, on what is truly dependable, and noticing that by keeping the attention on the mindfulness, the hindrances are not being fed, they're being starved. But you're not even starving the hindrances directly, you're just appreciating the power, the wholesomeness of mindfulness, of that stability of awareness, and that it has the flavor of liberation. It's subtle. I'm not saying it's going to, noticing a little mindfulness in the mind is going to knock our socks off. But, we can learn to appreciate what's subtle. And it's very compelling. And then, of course, when it gets more momentum, it's not subtle. It feels powerful, like I was describing earlier. Like, it can really be the heart's refuge. Through hard times, through beautiful times, this is our refuge. There really isn't any other refuge except for this awareness. And as the Buddha says in another discourse, when there is the stability of present moment awareness, all the other beautiful qualities of mind that we could probably generate together if we sat around and talked about, what are the beautiful qualities of mind we've noticed in our own heart and we've noticed in other people, all of them begin to gather when we have some stability, the samadhi, the stability of present moment awareness. Naturally, there's kindness there. Can you imagine having this very grounded, earthy stability of present moment awareness and being unkind? They just don't go together. There would be joy there, the lightness of the heart. There'd be good energy there. There'd be a natural, organic curiosity there. There'd be some real ease and tranquility there. There'd be stillness and balance. And what I've just gone through, some of you probably recognize, is the 7 factors of awakening. And they're often, these wholesome 7 factors of awakening are often used in opposition to the 5 hindrances of wanting and not wanting and dullness and restlessness and doubt. These are what hinder the stability of present moment awareness. And it's the balancing of the 7 factors, mindfulness being the sort of primary factor of these 7, and then 3 energizing, 3 tranquilizing. So we have the curiosity about the underlying nature, investigation. We have energy, we have joy. These are the energizing, brightening qualities, wholesome qualities, and they balance the tranquilizing ones of tranquility or ease of heart, stillness, concentration, and equanimity. Those are the 3 tranquilizing. And so it's really it's totally good to have a good skill set of abandoning the difficult hindrances that come our way, the ways our mind gets obsessive and entangled in experience and spin and spin and spin. It's really good. And I'll, in a moment, talk a little bit more about abandoning the hindrances. But we want to remember that, in a way, the most efficient use of effort, wise effort, isn't just in trying to abandon the tendencies of our heart and mind that are, activating reactive patterns, triggering, this and that in our mind, because it can be endless. And then we start to use the strategies to get rid of the hindrances with a hindrance, like with aversion, or with greed, or with superficiality and distractedness, which obviously won't work. So generally, and this is the same in educational psychology, if you want to teach a child or teach an adult something, and as the teacher, you spend, 80% of your energy telling your student what they're doing wrong and telling them, how to stop doing the wrong thing, and only 10 or 20% directing them to what they're doing correctly, what they're doing well, you're not a very good teacher, and it's not going to work very well. Psychology as a grad student a long time ago, and I think it was like 94. I don't know where they got this statistic. It was too long ago where I read the studies, but it's well into the 90% or more. That the teacher should be creating experiences and giving feedback to the student, so they're mostly noticing their success at like 94%, and only being corrected, only recognizing what's off, 5, 6, 7% of the time, mostly getting reinforced about what's right. And what that does is it really helps build a useful kind of persistence, steadfastness, commitment to the learning process, to the insight process, which is what this path is all about. We're purifying our understanding indirectly by applying ourselves to the task of stabilizing present moment awareness. And stability of present moment awareness, samadhi, is capable of undoing ignorance, all the habits of experiencing the moment through the distortions of greed, distortions of aversion, the distortions of misperception because of habits. All of those unuseful, unhelpful habits don't hold up with the stability of present moment awareness. And then that the wise effort in that, sure, we need to abandon the hindrances that are present. We need to prevent unwholesome tendencies from arising. But if by developing and maintaining, especially the wholesome quality, wholesome valuing of mindfulness, and we really build this momentum and end up really preventing and abandoning, keeping the unwholesome tendencies that clearly still lurk in our mind. Here's another example, because it's so powerful, the environment that we live in and we hang out in and the people we hang out with and the things we, pay attention to. It really matters. I mean, this is one of the obvious lessons in life. It really matters what we pay attention to. And that obviously has to do with who we hang around with, what environments we spend time in. And so if you put me in a so-called unwholesome environment with people who have a lot of unwholesome habits, acting out in unwholesome ways, right? Then I'm going to sympathetically vibrate with what's going on in those places with those people. They're going to, in a sense, activate those same tendencies in my own heart and mind. Have you noticed that? Like when we're around people who are power hungry, kind of feels like, well, I should try to, get this and have that and compete in this way and judge myself according to these, standards of value. I'm more valuable if I have achieved this or have that. And I feel bad because my cell phone is 8 years old, or this is true about me, or I've never done that. Right? These things that maybe we once felt when we were younger but thought we had overcome, well, there we go again. We can start to experience some of those, not so skillful tendencies that we thought no longer were true, but actually we just were able to avoid environments that triggered them. So the easy way to wear down those habits, those tendencies, is to simply not feed them, right? And we don't feed them by learning to hang out in other places. Well, we don't just do this externally, we do this within our own mind. Where do we let our mind hang out? Now, this, in the way the Buddha taught, this doesn't actually do the uprooting of these latent tendencies in the mind to be greedy, to be self-centered, to be angry or aversive or self-hatred, to have self-hatred. But it really keeps them quiet. And then it's ultimately the deep transformation of one's view that finally uproots those tendencies of greed and hatred and delusion. So this really speaks to this teaching on the 4 exertions. And if you want a really nice, clear description, one of the first links I sent out in week 1, and I think I sent it out again for week 2, is Bhikkhu Bodhi's book, The Noble Eightfold Path. And you can get a digital copy online free of charge. Wonderful, concise book on the Buddhist teachings on the Eightfold Path. And just look for the chapter on wise or right effort. And then you'll get a little useful description of the 4 exertions, where the Buddha basically says, okay, we have some faith that it matters, so I'm going to apply myself. I'm going to train my heart. I'm going to persist in abandoning these tendencies of mind that are unskillful and preventing them from arising, right? And this is like learning not to feed the unskillful hindrances, those qualities of my mind that hinder the stability of awareness. So, for example, lust or wanting, the wanting mind. And it doesn't matter if it's an attraction to another person, a sexual attraction or whatever towards another person, or wanting some object, a new electronic device, or whatever it might be, a new car, a new life, a new body. And so, how do I, when I'm not so wise, how do I feed the wanting monster in my heart? And how can I starve that tendency? By how I pay attention. It really matters what we pay attention to. So this is like in terms of abandoning greed that's already gotten head of steam in our heart. We've already been looking at the catalog or fantasizing about a relationship or a new possession, right? So it's already has some momentum. So now I realize my mind is obsessing with greed. How do I abandon that? Now, if our practice has a lot of momentum, we could go right to recognizing mindfulness. Oh, this is just something being known. And then sustaining that continuity of present moment awareness, and that whole drama of wanting might pop like a little bubble. But if we're really in deep with the identification with the greed and that sort of belief that goes with it, that if only, then I'll be happy. If I could only get this. Sure, I'm a Buddhist practitioner. I get it. Greed's not the way, but I'll get back to my practice much better if I get what I want. So we're hooked, in other words. So then we have to do the more complex work of abandoning that particular drama that the mind has already taken the bait, already has been seduced and caught up. So now then we have to practice the unhooking. So the question we ask ourselves, when we pay attention to what aspect of this does the greed go away? And the Buddha had a lot of advice about this. And specifically with greed, when I pay attention to impermanence, the impermanence of whatever it is the mind is imagining, then the seductiveness of greed loses its charm. So just try something right now with me if you would. Maybe there's something you want. Maybe there's something you chronically want in your life. Better health, being younger, beautiful cabin on the south shore of Lake Superior, ice cream, good sex, whatever it is that you find yourself wanting, right? And then notice that, we bring it to mind, and then just honestly reflect, and keep in mind reflecting on the impermanence of that thing, whatever it is. Like, for me, I do have an attraction to having the perfect cabin. People know I bring it up and use it as an example quite often. And then, like, if I recognize that however wonderful certain moments might be when the conditions are just right, all the repairs to the cabin have been done, somehow the money for it has come, manifested, and the bills up to now have been paid, there will always be the next year's property tax, or the next mortgage payment, or the next payment for the next repair, or the next thing that needs to be done. Or now it's too cold or too hot or too wet or too snowy to enjoy it, or there's noisy neighbors, right? So the charm, like when it's really a pleasant experience, yeah, there might be moments when it's really nice, but those moments are ephemeral because there'll be other moments when it gets disturbed. That niceness gets disturbed. And ultimately, I'll get too old to go to that cabin. Or for some reason or not, or another, it will be taken away from me. I'll die, and then it won't be mine anymore, will it? So to actively bring the impermanence of whatever it is the mind's attracted to takes some of the seductiveness away from the greed and allows the mind to drop the attachment that fuels the obsessive greed. And then there's some freedom. And then we can go to the mode of preventing that greed from re-arising by not paying attention to certain things that built the attachment to begin with. So like when the idea of a cabin on the South Shore reemerges in my mind, then I immediately don't pay attention to the charming moments when the cabin would be perfect. I immediately remember that I'll have to do this, and I'll have to do that, and I'll have to pay for this, and there will be mosquitoes, and the ticks, and the that. And if I just bring my attention to those things, I won't take the bait and start imagining Mark being happy, and if only, then things would be all right, and live happily ever after. That spell, I won't fall under that spell because I know how to prevent my mind from falling into that spell by paying attention to certain aspects as opposed to other. And it all arises by asking the pragmatic question. When I pay attention to what, does my mind get seduced and get caught up in the obsessive cycle? When I pay attention to what, does my mind abandon the whole greed project? It's really pragmatic like that. And whatever your, the drama is around greed. And for aversion, it's slightly different, right? Instead of using impermanence and recognizing that seeing the impermanence of the thing I'm attracted to really undermines that emotion of greed, of that delusion, like if only then I'll be happy. With all of our self-hatred, hatred, and fear targeted outward, is finding a way back to that basic goodness, that basic kindness and compassion of the heart. Not what we imagine, oh, I have to have compassion or kindness towards the person I'm angry at, or toward myself if I have self-hatred. Doesn't matter, actually. Finding a way, so what, when I bring what to mind, will I feel some kindness? Well, we might have some kindness about the tree out in the backyard, and just appreciating it and wishing it well. Because when the mind is caught up in some anger obsession, fear obsession, entangled with hatred and aversion of one kind or another, that mind can't really allow in the actual organic experience of kindness. They just don't fit in the mind together. So when we find some way to have a kind, compassionate, appreciative heart, then in that moment, even if it has nothing to do with what we were angry about, in that moment, if I were to look back toward the experience of what I was angry about, it's like, oh, I don't want to go there. It's like anger feels like a red hot ball. Why would I pick that up? No, I'm not going to pick that up. Or poop. Why would I pick up poop? No. I'm going to stay with kindness. So the thing, when we're in the anger, it somehow is murderously sweet, as the Buddha said. It just feels like, yeah, of course, because we feel so real as a egoic being when we're angry. That's how the power of self-righteousness. Even when we're hating ourselves, yeah, I'm so bad. It just is, it's like a glue for the sense of self. And so because it's so seductive, so sweet on the surface, we don't realize how toxically heavy and painful the squeeze is of anger, of aversion, whether it's self-hatred or targeted outside of ourselves. But when we touch back into some moments of kindness, that grip of hate is released, temporarily at least. And so then when the mind, because of the momentum, goes back to what we were angry about, what we're full of hate about, it's just like the contrast between the release and wholeness of kindness, a moment of kindness, and then going back to the anger. It doesn't make sense. So it gives us, touching into kindness gives the heart some immunity, some protection from getting dragged back in. So these are just some simple examples of abandoning and preventing the mind from getting entangled in the 5 hindrances of greed, hatred, dullness, restlessness, and doubt. Just understanding, like, what are the pragmatic, practical antidotes? So, oh yeah, impermanence, when I'm caught with greed, I can skillfully find ways to reflect on the impermanence. When I've got a lot of hate, a lot of fear going, I can just get interested, well, how might this heart find its way back to moments of kindness right now? Restlessness, right? Well, maybe if I just, because restlessness and worry just sort of get whipped up, maybe I'll just be with the in-breath, be with the out-breath. Maybe I'll take a walk and just feel the body. Maybe I'll notice the wind blowing through the trees. And I'll really bring my heart, my awareness to this. And it really causes that sort of whipping up of restlessness to be abandoned, to realize that I can just connect with this one thing. But it isn't even like we're going to have a specific map. It's really that question about, when I pay attention to the present moment, in what way, when I bring to mind what here in the present moment, does this hindrance weaken? When I pay attention to what in the present moment, does this hindrance strengthen? How is my mind feeding into building the momentum of this hindrance? How can, by paying attention to what weaken the hindrance? Because whatever drama we get seduced and caught up into, it only continues because it's being fed as opposed to being starved. But remember what I said a little earlier, like the real quick way is to go right to wisdom awareness. So the more momentum you have at any moment when there is confidence or faith in awareness, in the stability of wisdom and awareness, present moment awareness, then try to go directly there, because it's wholesome, it feels good, it's onward leading to liberation. And wisdom will know that, oh yeah. And it's like a quick way to abandon the pattern. And I bet most of you have had this experience where you've been in a sit, 30-minute sit, let's say, and, had some good momentum in the beginning, and then some memory came up. The mind takes the bait. Oh yeah, I need to think about this. I'm going to think about this. Starts to think about it. We get in that feedback loop where the emotional intensity, the juice of the emotions that arise because I'm bringing these thoughts to mind, these memories to mind, then the emotional feeling triggers more the mind to keep revisiting the content, the memory, and the memory triggers the emotion, and the emotion triggers more thinking, and that's the feedback loop. And so we're spinning, and we're caught up for a couple minutes, 5 minutes, maybe even longer, really in it, in the sense that wisdom and awareness doesn't know we're lost in thought. That means we're deluded, which is very common. That's most of the day, right? Where we're lost in thought. And then, fortunately, the mind, wisdom, mindfulness reemerges because of momentum that was already set in motion. And so there it is. The mind realizes, oh, I've been lost in thought. I'm totally caught up in this drama, and it's tight. We realize it's tight in that moment. And haven't we had moments where just in that sense of feeling how contracted the body and mind is because of having been lost in thought, instead of the self-hatred or judgment, like I'm such an idiot, why am I thinking about this? Which is just more of the same. It's just like the mind realizes it's holding like a hot pan, and it just drops it, just drops everything. And that's a really important moment to recognize how the mind went from totally entangled to totally empty of that entanglement. And actually to discern in that moment distance between that moment being entangled, and then there was some clarity of the weightfulness of that entanglement, and then that very clean dropping, like a bubble popping. The reason why it's really important to clearly see that moment is it really inspires a faith. Like, so when the mind is in any kind of confused, doubtful, greedy, hateful state, dull, restless state, wisdom stops believing that I'm a million miles away from my practice. I'm a million miles away from being in that beautiful, balanced state. Because we've seen enough times how we've gone from being totally caught to totally, the mind, the heart, totally empty of being caught, free, balanced, in turning a flip from deluded, entangled, suffering being to the heart present and free. And that really starts to change like how we make effort. So then more and more, the effort, like when we notice the mind is entangled, we might take out all our Dharma training. Okay, I'm going to prevent and abandon, and I'm going to bring out the antidotes for this and way my mind is caught up in this little drama, this little storm, and I'm going to work with this little storm in this way. And I've got all my techniques, and I'm doing all the right things, and it's hard, but yeah, I got to do it. Where we're really getting in. And the Buddha, in one of the discourses, he has an image, a really useful image of a cow herder. And let's say this person has 20 heads of cow, and he's got to bring the herd down this very narrow path with a rice paddy on this side and a rice paddy on this side, and the rice is almost ready for harvest, and the farmers are going to beat me if any of my cows walk on their fields because they're almost ready to be harvested. So the cow herder is frantically, with a stick, keeping the cows on that narrow pathway through the rice paddies. And that's the image the Buddha uses for how we have to really be working with the hindrances so they don't seduce the mind and get me caught up. And oh my God, that cow's in the paddy. How did he get in? And get him back on the path. And it's really stressful, but totally necessary sometimes. But when we have more of those moments where we see that we're never far away from that beautiful, stable, present moment balance, then we can go right back. And then by trusting that stability, that samadhi, that stillness, that ease, that flavor of freedom, the mind, this marriage of being intimate without attachment, then it's like the practitioner, all I have to do is keep in mind the beauty and wholesomeness and the flavor of freedom of mindful awareness. So that's why I mentioned, I used for the guided meditation and mentioned that you might want to take up as your practice these last several weeks of practice, more of a wisdom approach where you're using wisdom. You're not trying to meditate. So that may be a way to begin. Okay, Mark, don't meditate. Just recognize the reality of awareness right here. Get interested in the reality of awareness. It's already here. So just recognize it as best you can. Be interested in it. And in being interested in it, notice that it has immediately already the flavor of freedom. And noticing that by noticing awareness and that it has the flavor of freedom, the momentum of present moment awareness builds. The practice builds. Very simple. Recognize awareness. Recognize the flavor of freedom in that awareness, that present moment awareness. Recognize that that builds momentum. And really, that's a way to directly do this third part of the Noble Eightfold Path, this samadhi, wise effort, wise mindfulness, wise concentration. And you'll have time next week, last 25 minutes or so, we'll have small groups. Please consider joining in for those small group discussions. You might find them really helpful, but of course, you can just find a way to do it in your home life, have the same conversation the small groups will have next week around this flipping right into the stability of awareness that I talked about tonight.